Someone stacked 750,000 tons of stone on an ocean reef. No wheel, no pulley, no draft animal, no metal tool, no written word. It's real. 100 man-made islands mapped, dated, cataloged, and it sits on a reef where no stone belongs. So how did it get there? That's the question no one has answered. 3 things about Nan Madol refuse to add up. Start with the black stone itself. Every wall here is built from long 6-sided columns of black basalt stacked like logs in a cabin. Nature makes them. Basalt cools into these hexagonal pillars on its own, but nature made them somewhere else on the island. And that's the first problem. The nearest good source of these columns is miles away, across land or across open sea. Some weigh 5 tons, the heaviest reach 50, and every one of them had to arrive here on a reef by water. 50 tons is heavier than a loaded truck. There are millions of these columns. Add it up and you get 750,000 tons. The people who did this had no cranes, no iron, no writing to leave instructions. What they left was a city and a legend. Ask a local historian how it was done and you'll get an answer. 2 sorcerers, brothers, they made the stones fly. That's the honest local record, and it's the only one. But here's the problem. It's the only answer anyone has ever offered. Southeast coast of Pohnpei, Micronesia, one of the wettest places on Earth. This is where the impossible city stands. To see why it shouldn't exist, you have to stand in the water between the islands, in the spaces the builders named the city after. Nan Madol means the spaces between. The spaces are canals, a grid of them threading 100 islands like streets of water. They call it the Venice of the Pacific, but Venice sits in a shallow lagoon. Nan Madol sits on a living coral reef open to the sea. Build on sand and your walls sink. Build on coral in the surf, and the ocean fights you every day. They built anyway, and up. Walls rise as high as a 2-story house, 25 feet of stacked stone, no mortar holding them, just weight and fit. You could call that clever engineering, but here's the problem. The stone to build it isn't under your feet. There's no basalt on this reef. So where did it come from? Follow the columns backward and the trail leaves the reef entirely, heading inland and around the coast. Geologists can read basalt like a fingerprint. Each flow has its own chemistry. Match the walls to a source and you can find the quarry. They did. The columns don't come from one place. They come from several, some on the far side of the island from the city. The far side. That means the heaviest stones on Earth were carried around or across an entire island before they ever touched the water. Sokes, a basalt ridge on Pohnpei's northwest coast, one likely quarry. From here to Nan Madol is a journey no one has explained. Picture the first step, a 50-ton pillar lying in the forest that has to be freed, moved, and floated with rope, wood, and hands. Downhill, maybe you roll it. Then the land ends, and you're standing at the shore with a stone that sinks like the anchor it could be. So we know where the stone came from. That part is solved. What no one has solved is the next part, how it crossed the water. The going idea is rafts. Lash logs into a platform, float the column, pole it along the coast, ride it in on the tide. It sounds workable, but here's the problem. No one has made it work at this scale. The math keeps sinking the raft before the stone does. A raft big enough to carry 50 tons is itself enormous, and it has to survive open ocean, then thread a reef hundreds of times over. Hundreds? Try more. 750,000 tons, one raft load at a time is a voyage repeated for generations. How many generations? Hold that number, it's coming and it's stranger than the weight. And even if the rafts worked, you've only reached the reef. The stones still have to come up 25 feet into a wall by hand. Which raises a question the raft never answers. Why carry a mountain out to sea to build here, of all the places on the island? This is where the mystery stops being about muscle and starts being about scale. Line up what we know and it doesn't balance. Pohnpei is a small island. The workforce that quarried, floated, and stacked this city had to be fed on islets that grow no food. That's the reveal hiding in plain sight. Nan Madol has no soil and no fresh water. Nothing to eat, nothing to drink is made here. Every meal, every drink, for every worker and every noble was carried in by canoe, a stone city that couldn't feed a single person. So the real weight isn't 750,000 tons of basalt. It's the years of labor and the population an island this size may never have held. Here's the honest part historians will say out loud. We do not know how they moved the stone. Every experiment so far falls short. And that failure reframes everything. The question was never just how. It's how could a people this few build something this impossible? The legend answered it the only way that fit. The stones flew because no human method fits. Even now, the magic and the math tie. Nandauas, the royal tomb at the city's heart, ringed by the highest walls of all, some cornerstones near 50 tons. If moving one such stone is barely possible, they saved the biggest for the hardest place, a tomb walled to the sky out on the reef. So the question sharpens, not just how and how many, but why here and why like this? Start ruling things out. Was it defense? An island fortress? The sea walls are real and the sea is a moat, but there was nothing out here to defend but the dead. Was it trade? A harbor city? But the canals are too shallow and too tangled for cargo. They lead to tombs and temples, not docks. What purpose is clear from the ruins themselves? This was a capital, the seat of a dynasty called the Saudeleur, who ruled all of Pohnpei. Around the year 1180, the Saudeleur began the Great Build. For 4 centuries the stone kept coming, then it stopped. 400 years of hauling basalt across the sea, and not one line written down to say how or why they chose the reef. You'd think a project this vast would leave records. It left legends, and the legends only deepen the problem instead of solving it. Because the oral history is specific. 2 brothers, Olisihpa and Olosohpa, came from across the sea seeking a place to build an altar. They tried and failed and moved and tried again until they reached this reef. Then, the story says, a dragon helped raise the stones. Strip the magic, and something real remains. Newcomers, a deliberate search for this exact reef, and a method they treated as beyond words. So, the reef wasn't a compromise, it was the target. They passed easier ground to build in the hardest place on the island. Why? The answer the ruins keep pointing to is power. To rule was to command the impossible, and to be seen commanding it. A wall of 50-ton columns says one thing without writing. Whoever raised this can make you carry mountains. Obey. But that's a motive, not a method. Knowing why they wanted it built explains nothing about how the stone actually got there. And now, the number I told you to hold. The estimated labor to build Nan Madol outstrips what Pohnpei's population should have managed. By some estimates, moving this much stone by raft would take the whole island's people working for lifetimes for a city no one could live off. Which is why the raft theory, the best one we have, still fails the test. It's possible on paper, no one has ever shown it in the water. So we're left with a city that exists and no proven way it was built. Everything ordinary has been ruled out. What's left is uncomfortable. The deeper you look, the less it reads like practicality, and the more like defiance. A people who chose the sea's hardest reef and moved a mountain to it on purpose. And then, at the height of it all, they walked away. The stones stopped moving, the canals emptied, the city was left to the tide. Fact that stays with you. On these islands, the dead were kings. The living couldn't get a cup of water without a canoe. They built a tomb heavier than Stonehenge in the sea and then couldn't drink there. That's the scale of the will behind this place. Around 1628, a warrior named Isokelekel overthrew the last Saudeleur. The dynasty fell, but the abandonment came slower and stranger. Stones were never taken away, never reused. A city that cost generations to raise was simply left standing and started to sink. It's sinking still. Every year the reef swallows a little more of the walls the ocean was never supposed to hold up. So rule the field down. It wasn't a fort, nothing out there to defend, wasn't a port. The canals go to tombs, not trade. It wasn't built where the stone was. The stone came from across the island, and it wasn't written down. The only record is a spell. What's left is a single, unbearable possibility. A people so bent on proving power over the sea that they solved a problem we still can't. Not magic, not lost technology, just an unrecorded human method. Rope, wood, water, and numbers of people we can't quite account for. And the honest edge of it, match every quarry, weigh every column, and one step still won't close, the crossing itself from shore to reef. 750,000 tons made that crossing. We can prove it happened. We cannot yet prove how. That gap is Nan Madol. The stones are still out there, exactly where impossible says they can't be, waiting on the reef for the first person to explain them. And here's where it goes next. Nan Madol isn't the only reef city built this way. 2,500 miles away, on the island of Kosrae, the ruins of Leilu rise from another lagoon, the same basalt, the same impossible stacking. Two island peoples, oceans apart, chose the same maddening way to build. Either they shared a secret, or they reached it twice, alone. That coast is where this story sails next.